Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. This was a donated request from Mohamed, 1914, The Shaping of the Modern Muslim World, Part 1, with good old Dr. Yasir. So, this is part 3 of that. They're about 16 minutes long. Let's go.
And there are three primary promises that we're interested in. There are three primary correspondences and promises that we're interested in. Number one, the promises to the Arabs. The British promise to the Arabs. Beginning in July 1915, the British High Commissioner of Egypt. Now, who's the High Commissioner? High Commissioner is basically higher than an ambassador. He's like a governor who represents the British interests in that region. So he is the highest ranking British diplomat in the entire Middle East. And Egypt was already basically a British protectorate by the time. So the British High Commissioner in Egypt, his name is Sir Henry McMahan. Sir Henry McMahan. He is the one who starts thinking of different tactics of sending T.E. Lawrence as well. And Sir Henry McMahan begins a series of correspondences with the Sharif of Mecca. Who is the Sharif of Mecca? We have a picture of the Sharif of Mecca over here. Sharif Hussein ibn Ali, the Sharif of Mecca. And the Sharif of Mecca is the 40th descendant of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a picture of somebody who is directly descendant of our Prophet ﷺ. He is the 40th descendant of our Prophet ﷺ. Him and his family have been ruling Mecca for over 700 years. 700 years. They have been the governors of Mecca. Under the Abbasids, under the Mamluks, under the Ottomans, they kept the Sharif clan out of respect for them, because they are, after all, Sharif means Sayyid. Sharif means, for us, Sayyid, it means Al al-Bayt. Sharif means they are of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
That's pretty cool.
And they have been a local power, really, to be honest, more than maybe like 1,000 years. They have been in the in politics, basically. And they are the most prestigious of all Arab rulers, and the only Arab ruler who might be a threat to the Ottomans. Because after all, he's Sharif and he's the governor of Mecca. So he's got the blood and he's got the geography. And he's got the history, and that's a 1,000-year history, right? So if anybody is going to be a unifying force for the Muslims against their Khalifa, you understand? Divide and conquer here, right? If there's anybody whom the Muslims could possibly be bribed into accepting as an alternative Khalifa, it would be this man, Sharif Hussein ibn Ali. And therefore, Sir McMahan, Henry McMahan, began a series of correspondences, and T.E. Lawrence became a personal friend to Sharif Hussein, a family friend, literally a family friend. He becomes on a first name basis to Sharif Hussein and his three sons. And the Sharif, of course, now, yes, he is Al al-Bayt, but we had mentioned in our lecture, just because you're Al al-Bayt doesn't mean you are automatically an angel or a...
Any known relatives of the Prophet alive today? Just curious. That was my phone, sorry.
Saint. And the Sharif had ambitions of his own, and he had wanted to be the Khalifa for many years, even before World War I. We now have records of him pre-World War I sending messages to the Brits that this is pre-World War I, that, if you want, you can kind of help me and we can work something out against the Ottomans, right? Now the Brits at the time had no need for this man, so they just ignored it. But now the idea comes up again. And the Brits basically bribe, not just by money, but most importantly, what is the bribe that is really far more powerful than money? It's power. It's power. That is the most powerful bribe a man knows. Power. They promise the Sharif that if you fight against your fellow Muslims, if you rebel against your Khalifa, and that is the Ottoman Sultan, we will make you the next Caliph. And we will give you a united Arabia. By Arabia, we don't mean Saudi Arabia. We mean the Arab lands, Damascus, Baghdad, everything in between, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, everything, Arabia. You shall become the Khalifa of a united Arabia. And they continue to convince him until finally it is now set in stone. And we have to point out here that yes, we're angry at the foreign powers, at the West, at England. We're angry at the double dealing. But in the end of the day, they used us against ourselves. In the end of the day, we have to put the blame where also it lies. And Muslims are also guilty, just like every other party is guilty. And we have to acknowledge the greed and the power struggles on all sides. And here we have a copy of one of those letters. If you take a look at it on your slide, this is a copy. If you look at the date, can you see the date on there? October 24th, 1915. I want you to read this, that subject to the above modification, Great Britain is prepared to recognize and support the independence of the Arabs in all of the regions within the limits demanded by the Sharif of Mecca. Notice, very clear here. This is the original letter, by the way. You see Henry McMahan, you see the signature. This is the original letter. Great Britain will guarantee the holy places, and Great Britain will give the Arabs her advice and assistance, and I'm convinced this declaration will assure you beyond all possible doubt of the sympathy of Great Britain towards the aspiration of her friends, the Arabs, and will result in a true and lasting alliance, the immediate results of which will be the expulsion of the Turks from the Arab lands and the freeing of the Arab people from the Turkish yoke, which for so many years has oppressed them so heavily. So, McMahan, with obviously the approval and the knowledge of the British government, they promise Sharif Hussein ibn Ali that if he revolts, the British will give him a united Arab land and he will be made the next Khalifa from Iraq to Turkey to Syria to the Hijaz. And the Arabs took this as an official promise from England. And based on this promise, the Sharif launched a war against the Ottomans. Not against the Brits, against the Ottomans. And the Brits, under the command of T.E. Lawrence, would literally tell the Sharif's forces, attack here, attack there, do this, do that. And now if you watch the movie Lawrence of Arabia, now if you watch the movie with this background in mind, you will see exactly this is what Lawrence does. That he's the one who has the idea, let's attack Aqaba, let's do this, let's do that. Now the Brits are telling the Arabs where to attack against the Turks for their best interest. And the primary line of attack was the railroad that connected the Ottoman lands to Arabia and to Jordan. They wanted to minimize, because railroad is the highway. If you cut off the highway, you're not going to get troops, right? And so, even though the Arabs were not that effective in terms of army, they were effective in terms of destroying the railroad, in terms of bombing, the lines and whatnot. And therefore, the Arabs took this as the promise that if we fight against the Ottomans, we will be given our united Arabia. And T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, was the one who was put in charge of this Arab revolt. Now, a little bit of footnote about Lawrence. Lawrence's role has been sensationalized and made larger than life by an American journalist. His name was Lowell Thomas from Chicago. He was visiting the lands and he found this Britisher dressed like an Arab, speaking Arabic, and he kind of made it far more romantic. He's the one who gave him the title Lawrence of Arabia. It's a very romantic view of an Englishman fighting for Arab independence. He basically painted it in a very positive light. We cannot forget that T.E. Lawrence, in the end of the day, is a British agent provocateur, right? We should not have much sympathy at all for T.E. Lawrence, even though there's no denying that Lawrence believed in his own cause, which is Arab independence. But when Lawrence found out about the other two agreements that we're going to mention right now, guess what? He didn't tell anything to the Arabs. And he continued promising them that which he knew his own government had already agreed elsewhere. Is that clear, or did I lose you guys? T.E. Lawrence figured out there are other agreements my government has made. We're going to talk about them right now. But he still continued to promise the Sharif and his family all of these promises, even though when World War I came to an end and the negotiation was being done, it is true, Lawrence did fight the British verbally for an Arab independent state, but he was outruled and outvoted, and he basically abandoned the Arab cause and went back and died in an automobile or a motorcycle accident. Perhaps.
So, it must be a British thing, because during the Revolutionary War, there's the news. Manhunt, some guy shooting up place. Now they're on the hunt for him. Anyways, so the British during the Revolutionary War convinced a bunch of the Native American tribes to fight for them. They did. And they told them that they would secure lands for them and everything like that. They lost the war, and they did put in a word of giving them a big section of land. I believe I might be in that section of land that the British had said we kind of partitioned off to give to them, and the Americans said no, because they just won the war. And then War of 1812, they did the same thing where they were going to partition off land, and they didn't even bring that one up. They told the natives, yeah, well, we're going to do it. Never even brought it up at the negotiating table because they knew it wasn't going to happen. War of 1812 basically ended as a draw, and they just knew they're going to say no, so why even do it? And yet they don't get any flack for that. Instead, Americans get flack because, oh, well, you did this, you did that. Yeah, sure. We'll get it. That's not for this video, but it's just the British made an agreement with the natives and didn't follow through with that either. But I think if some of the natives had moved to Canada at the time, I think then they were okay. But most of them didn't want to move to Canada. They wanted to stay, they wanted to stay in their areas where they were at. Beside the point. Back to the video.
Perhaps he felt guilty about the Arab cause, but there's no denying that he was a double agent, meaning that he knew exactly what his own country had promised, and he pretended to be a friend to the Sharif, but he continued fighting on behalf of England and telling the Sharif lies that he knew were lies. He did feel guilty most likely, but so what? In the end of the day, he continued doing what he did. So, this is the first back.
America did some... Well, I shouldn't say that. When America was backing Afghanistan against the Russians left, and the Americans were like, all right, done. And they shouldn't have. Charlie Wilson had tried to keep things going with Pakistan by building schools and hospitals, and the government was like, we don't need to, we won. And it's like, we didn't though. You can't just turn your back. But I didn't pause for that. I paused it because Lawrence was a double agent, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that his country was telling him. It was probably a need to know kind of thing, and he didn't need to know. They had negotiations going on with other countries. They're telling him to say this. But I don't know for sure that he didn't believe that they wouldn't do what they were saying. Now, maybe he did know that, no, they're not going to do it, but my job is to push this. I don't know. But to defend Lawrence, you don't always know if you're being sent somewhere and what you're promising will actually be delivered. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Hand deal. It's called the McMahan promises, or it's also called the McMahan-Hussein correspondence. We have physical letters. I showed you one actual letter. Very clearly, the Arabs are promised complete independence. You will become the Khalifa if you fight against the present Khalifa. This is the first backhand deal. The second one, which was far more sinister, was the something called the Sykes Pico agreement. And this is really of the most important agreements. Now, remember that the McMahan letters date back to 1915. Guess what? In 1915, the same year that the Brits are promising the Arabs independence, they have begun another series of negotiations. This time with the Russians and the French. Now, the Russians and the French are on their side. Right? The Russians and the French are on their side. And the Russian foreign minister and the British foreign minister and the French foreign minister, they met a number of times, figuring out what is to be done if we win. Notice the greed. In 1915, they're already eyeing the prize. In 1915, they're going to wonder, how are we going to slice this pie? How are we going to divide this cake amongst us? You get the point here, right? If we win,
it's a sad reality of the old world. I'll say old world, but it's current, of just ways that colonialism was still around. I mean, it's probably, I mean, it's still around today, but I don't think it's as prevalent in terms of you don't hear about colonies rebelling against their mother country like you did before.
what are we going to do? We don't want to fight in public. Let's hash it out right now. And so Russia demanded, they want Istanbul. And they want the main land of Turkey. Why? Because we just said that in order to get to the ocean, you need to go through Istanbul. Also, Russia had vested interests in Armenia. Armenia and Turkey always had a conflict between the two, and Russia was very pro-Armenian. So they wanted basically the main Ottoman lands, if you like. And France wanted a protectorate in Lebanon, what is now Syria. They wanted chunks of Syria. And England demanded the bulk of the Arab lands, and that is basically Iraq and Transjordan and the Hijaz. This is what they wanted, and eventually they agreed to this type of share, and this is called the Sykes Pico Agreement, Sykes-Picot, the Sykes Pico Agreement, after the British and the French the ministers who actually negotiated the treaty, and it was agreed upon by all three governments in utmost secrecy. And we have the original map of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. If you see this, that is the actual original map, and if you look very carefully, you cannot probably see it there, but there is the signature of Sykes and Picot right at the bottom. Do you see my mouse?
I'm guessing it's right here, right there. That's my guess.
How come you don't see my mouse? I don't know why you don't see my mouse. Okay, but on the bottom right-hand corner, you see the signatures of Sykes and Picot. Now, literally, they're gathered around a map, and they're figuring out who's going to get the red, who's going to get portion A, who's going to get portion B, and they're arguing, and they're drawing arbitrary lines here and there, and the modern Middle East is literally being carved out and argued over on a map and a table between the two or three of them. Each one is saying, no, this me, that me. Finally, the end map is in front of you. We still have the original map. And the only thing that comes to mind here is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ reported in Musnad Imam Ahmed. It is only a matter of time. يُوشِكُ أَن تَتَدَاعَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْأُمَمِ. It's only a matter of time before the other nations will call one another to attack you. Just like people are called to eat from a common plate. Just like people are called to eat from one plate, they're going to be called to attack you. They're literally debating and negotiating who's going to get which share of the pie.
Do you think that those three countries would have been able to carve that out if the Ottoman Empire was stronger and not in the decline? How long had it been around? It had been around 1,000 years? Was that what it was? Or 700 years? I'm trying to remember off memory, and I'm sure I'm wrong. So I'm just going to say 1,000 years. That seems long now. But anyways, how long had they been on the decline? Because if they were still, holding firm, I think you're going to have a little more trouble. You could start a proxy war, which it sounded like that's what happened, but that proxy war isn't going to do anything in terms, if they were a much stronger country, they're going to wipe out that attacking force. That's nothing. But how long had they been on the decline? I mean, was it clearly where other countries could see, yeah, they're just hanging on now. That's all that's going on.
Slice of the cake goes where, and eventually they agree to these arbitrary lines, and these arbitrary lines basically form the map of the modern Middle East to this day. And this is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and it was agreed upon in utmost secrecy. And The irony of ironies, the Frenchman was called Francois Georges Picot, and the British was called Sir Mark Sykes. Both of them were ignorant of the Middle East. They had barely visited. Neither of them spoke Arabic. They're complete juhal of the situation. They're a bunch of diplomats, basically, right? They don't have first-hand experience or ground knowledge of the ethnicities, cultures, it's literally a map that they have not even been to. And they're arguing and debating who's going to get which portion on a piece of paper. And this forms the basis of the modern Middle East. The Sykes Pico Agreement, most of the countries' borders and whatnot were basically drawn out here in this secret agreement. Now, question arises, if it was so secret and top secret and secret, how did it get public? Well, brief footnote here, not quite relevant to us. In 1917, Russia had its own internal revolution, not relevant to us. And the Tsars were thrown out and the Bolsheviks came to power. So the Tsar dynasty comes to an end and the Bolsheviks come to power, and the Bolsheviks wanted to expose how corrupt the Tsars were and how bad the Tsars were. So when they discovered these documents, they immediately went public with them. And the next day, New York Times heading and the Times of London heading is basically secret agreement between England and Russia and whatnot that goes against the McMahan promise, it goes against the Arabs' independence. Even the British public and the American public are now savvy to what's going on. Compare this to Edward Snowden and what he's doing in our times, right? This is the people leaking the secrets and whatnot, right? It was a source of great embarrassment to England that here we are promising the Arabs, and as we are promising them and signing letters with them, we're also signing letters with the Russians and with the French. But they managed to smooth it over, believe it or not. And wallahi, how naive the Muslims were. They managed to smooth it over and lie about it and say, oh, no, don't worry, we still promised you, still valid. And the Arabs to the very end believed them. To the very end. Right until the peace conference of 1990, as we'll talk about, inshallah ta'ala, in a while. Now, in this agreement, England got control over Jordan and Iraq and Palestine, what is now Palestine and Israel. France was given the southeastern part of Turkey and Syria, and Russia was promised Istanbul and most of central Turkey and what is today Armenia. This is called the Sykes Pico Agreement. That's the second of the three deals we want to talk about. The third deal. So 3 separate treaties going on regarding the same land. Look at how double dealing, how duplicitous, how hypocritical, how backstabbing the Brits were here. 3 different agreements. While all of this is going on, guess what? 1914, talk begins in the British cabinet at the highest levels of promising a Jewish homeland to the Zionists.
We're going to pause it right there. Start off with the third agreement. You know, I can't believe they kept falling for it, though. But that just goes to show you. They smoothed it over, probably because maybe Britain knew that the Arab world didn't want to go to war. And right now there is a world war, and Britain can sail on over there and lob a few missiles, cannons, whatever. And it's just easier to go along than to fight it. But I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there. So this was a donated request from Mohamed. You can donate too. There's a thanks button. Click on that. If you'd like, you can throw some money into this channel. Every donation is appreciated. There is the subscribe button. You can subscribe if you haven't. It's not going to hurt you. Seriously, it doesn't hurt you at all. There's a thumbs up button. You can click on that. That helps me more than it helps you, and it helps me a lot. And there's a thumbs down button, and you can hit that, and I think within 24 to 48 hours, you get AIDS. YouTube has an AIDS thumbs down hitman. So, I'm just saying, there's no cure. They can let you live comfortably, but you're going to get a lot of pneumonia. So it's just why even test fate? So until part 4, you have a good day, have a good night.